Rise TV and KPMG West held its 2023 Budget Day Summit yesterday. KPMG Nigeria here in Lagos. Here's an excerpt with Tola Adeyemi, chair of KPMG West Africa, senior partner KPMG Nigeria, analyzing the major components of Nigeria's 2023 budget.
The 2023 budget is a 21.8 trillion naira budget. This is significant because it's also a transition year budget. What this means is that the administration that has put this budget together is not the same administration that will be responsible for seeing it through to the end of the year. The budget is also significant in that it is a deficit budget. The size of the deficit this year is planned to be 11.3 trillion naira. What this means is that our budgeted expenditure will exceed our budgeted revenues by this amount. So, as a country, we have a revenue problem. When we delve deeper into our revenues, it's interesting to note that our total non-oil revenues exceed our oil revenues. Now, that's interesting and that's good, because it speaks to diversification of the economy. But it also suggests underperformance by the oil sector. Now, when we unpack the oil revenues further, we see that they are based on certain assumptions. One important assumption is the level of oil production. So the estimated oil production for this year is 1.69 million barrels per day. This is big considering where we're coming from, which is about 1.2 million barrels per day. To achieve this level of production is going to require really tackling the issue of oil theft and investment in the oil sector by the oil producers. This is key, and it's something that both the outgoing and incoming administrations will need to address frontally. The other significant thing is that subsidy is due to end by June 2023. This is a decision that's going to require real courage and political will on the part of the next administration. As we unpack these figures further, so we have a deficit of 11.3 trillion. This deficit is planned to be financed by debt. The key source of debt is domestic debt. This is not surprising considering the macroeconomic factors that have meant that it's become a lot more expensive to raise foreign debt. So, domestic debt will be at about 7 trillion naira. And I think the point to note here is that if any of the macroeconomic variables that I spoke about earlier, if we come in, for instance, under budget on revenues or come in over budget on expenditures, then the size of this deficit will be larger still. And the amount of debt that will be required to finance the deficit will be even bigger. In terms of policy thrusts, this budget focuses on security and defense. Now, this is understandable considering the security challenges we have in the country today. We cannot talk about economic growth without having a secure environment. We need this issue addressed, not just for the safeguarding the citizens, but also for attracting much needed foreign investment. Another area of policy thrust is infrastructure. Infrastructure, here I mean roads, rail, ports, power, telecommunications, etc. These are the things that help to unlock growth within the economy. So it's again right that spending should go to that area. The third area has to do with social development, education and healthcare. To achieve the kind of growth that we need, we certainly need a well-educated and healthy population to drive the growth. But the story here again really is that because of our revenue challenges, no matter how much is allocated to education, infrastructure, or healthcare, it can never be enough because government on its own cannot solve the issues here. We need substantial private sector investment in these areas. And this is why the issue of creating an enabling environment for private sector participation is so important. So as we look at the 2023 budget, there are a couple of issues that need to be unpacked. Firstly, enhancing government revenues. How can we increase government revenues? How can we find revenues from more sources? Because the more we can solve this problem, the smaller the deficit will be, and by extension, the smaller the debt will be. Secondly, removal of the petrol subsidy, which is unsustainable and unaffordable for the country. We will need the next administration to be very clear and courageous in terms of taking the right decision on this. The third is debt sustainability. There's been a lot of talk about the securitization of the debt. Now, this is all aimed at getting the debt levels to a more sustainable level. But beyond that, you've also got to look at governance around the debt. And by governance, I mean the approvals of the debt, the uses to which the debt is put, as well as the right levels of debt. Fourth is infrastructure financing. We've got to mobilize financing through a number of creative schemes. We already have things like the infrastructure tax credit, the work that the National Sovereign Investment Authority is doing in infrastructure. But we need a lot more investment in this area. Security and safety, the fifth one. I've spoken about this already, essential to what we need to do. The sixth one is about import substitution, really looking at how we encourage the manufacturing sector and increase local value add within our economy. In dealing with that, we'll also have to deal with the issue of multiple exchange rates. The seventh is social development. Education and healthcare, fundamental to getting us where we need to get to. So these are the issues that will need to be unpacked. These issues have not risen in 1 year. So it's not 1 year's budget that's going to deal with them. We will need consistency, we will need courage, we will need discipline and focused execution in dealing with all of these issues. And this is the task that the current administration faces, and more importantly, which we all need the next government to address with determination.